All right, welcome everybody. I can see you all joining. Welcome to the webinar. We'll be going live shortly in about 2 minutes. Thank you for joining early. I hope you've got a comfortable place, something to drink. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. All right, quite a few of you joining. Thank you for some of the chats. Stefan, thank you very much. It's nice to see you guys joining. I'm sorry you're all on mute. We're expecting a large crowd, so it's a bit of crowd control going on in the background. And from Pakistan, Anmar, hi Haley. Nice to see you all joining in. Some from London. Feel free to use the last minute in the chat room just to let us know where you're phoning from. Wow, Spain, Italy, Denmark, Milan. Hope you're all well, guys. Hope you're all in lockdown, but that you're safe and healthy. It's really nice to see Brazil, Stratford-upon-Avon, Austria, Germany. Wow. It's going so fast I can't even see. Finland, Sao Paulo, Milton Keynes. That's just up the road from me. Well done. So it's just gone 2 o'clock, but I see there's still a large number of people joining as we speak. So I'm going to literally just give it 1 minute, holding this space just for the last joiners to join. I don't know if you can see the participants, but we've got 272 people joined at the moment. It's still climbing. So no nerves then for me, which I am a little bit nervous. So while we're waiting, there we go. So it's still climbing. We are just about to hit 300 and we've got a couple of seconds to go before the minute expires. From Yorkshire, I see that, nice, and Russia. Wow, very, very good. It's nice to see such a big crowd of people in the room. All right. So I think, Lauren, if you're okay, shall I start? It's gone 1 minute past, or do you think there's still quite a lot more? Shall I wait another minute?
Hi, Ilse. Yeah, I think we're ready to get started.
Okay, wonderful. Well, everybody, welcome to this webinar on moving to virtual learning, unlocking the power of online training. So my name is Ilse Lansdal-Zandvoort, and it's a real pleasure to be with you. And as I've said, at the moment, we've got 379 still climbing people on the call, as you can see from the chat, from all over the world. So I hope that you can all hear me clearly. Just need to have one health check. I am working from home, seeing that we are all in lockdown. Sometimes my bandwidth is slightly unstable, and if it gets too much, I'll turn the video off. And also, don't worry if you can't hear me. I will just wait for my warning signal to go away, and then I'll resume talking, so you shouldn't miss too much. So first of all, welcome to the call. I take it because you are on the call, you are familiar with Ashridge Holt, who's part of the largest private education company, EF Education First. So most of you are either familiar with EF or Holt Ashridge. And together as a private education company, we provide language training for all ages, cultural exchange programs, educational travel, but also executive education, which is the area I'm phoning from, and qualifications, of course. So credentials in the virtual space, and why I'm asked to do this is we've been working with online programs, blended programs, executive tailored virtual programs and blended programs probably since 2007. I also did my own doctorate degree fully virtually. So, you know, I come from an experience of both being a user as being a designer and facilitator of virtual programs. So hopefully we can share some of our best practice. And of course, we're also doing the apprenticeship level programs at the moment, which is 100% virtual. So hopefully we can offer you something today. What we are planning to do and what I'm hoping to cover with you today is to clarify some terminology when it comes to even the name of this webinar that you've signed up to. So we'll just take a few minutes to talk about terminology. And then I'd like to explore how we learn and how do we approach learning, particularly in light of the fact that we want to shift or move from face-to-face learning to the virtual environment. I would very much like to surface some of the fears or anxieties we hold as a group, as a collective, around shifting from face-to-face to virtual learning and maybe working as well. And then maybe challenge some of the assumptions or myths that might be present in the room. And then I'd like to end the session by offering you some top tips. So when I was asked to present or prepare for this, it was really difficult to come up with what would be the key message that I think would be helpful and pragmatic to all of you. So I'd like to share a key fundamental for virtual best practice, whether it's working or learning in the virtual space. And then a 3-step framework that we've developed or that I've done, just thinking when we've helped our clients make that move as we've consulted with them, with the L&D and HR departments to try and make that shift, what we found really helpful, and hopefully that will be helpful to you as well. So what we're going to do, we've got 45 minutes in total. I will be spending in this 45 minutes, 35 minutes or so talking, with a good 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. To share some of our experience and best practice, as I said, from a range of exec clients as well as our apprenticeship programs, and working to address some of your concerns and hopefully to answer some of your questions as well. This is a health warning right up front to say that this 45-minute webinar cannot deliver a virtual learning experience, something we're very proud of doing at Ashridge. We've at the moment 512, keep going up, 512 participants on the call. There's just no ways we could make this experiential enough. So apologies up front that I can't have your videos, that I can't engage with you at this point. And that we won't be learning skills or practicing behaviors or creating connections or fostering dialogue at this point. But what I am hoping to do is that I can use it as a parallel process to talk about what you should be doing, and not in a 45-minute webinar. So one of the first things we find when we work in the virtual space, and when I mean synchronously, so together like this in synchronously online, we do need to contract with our participants how we work together. So in light of today, seeing that it's a short time frame and that there's a large number of you, 525 now, this is very much a one-directional broadcast. So hopefully you've signed up for that and you're willing to give your attention for 30, 35 minutes. And therefore we also follow the more traditional teleconference etiquette, which is you being muted, your cameras being off. You can see I'm kind of breaking the protocol a little bit by having my camera on there. And also what I do want to do is encourage you to ask questions. So you've got a Q&A icon. So if you move your mouse at the bottom of the screen, there's a black bar and there's Q&A in there. That's where we would like for you to pose your questions. And yes, I've seen a question. Are we going to be sharing the slides? Beth, you kind of reading my mind. The question, the slides will be shared with you as well as the recording. So if you've got any questions anywhere through the process, what I'd like you to do is raise it in the Q&A box. But also, if you can't hear me or if I'm talking too fast, which I tend to do when I get excited, please either raise your hand, which you can do by on the black bar, clicking on the participant list. So I see I've just been unstable, but only my internet. So click on the participant list and either raise your hand or tick the little green icon or put a note in the chat to Lauren just to say, could you just ask Ilse to repeat or something, and then I'll very happily be interrupted halfway through. So we are going to create a word cloud later today using Mentimeter. So if you haven't done that before, I'm encouraging you to get your phones handy, because a little bit later in the session, we're going to experiment with building a word cloud together using Menti. And then, of course, today's session is recorded, and anybody who's registered with an email address will get the link. Great. So there we go. If what I normally recommend is, I don't really like 45-minute webinars. I actually don't like 1-hour sessions either. We really recommend that you look for longer programs. So designing a learner journey. So either a modular journey that is blended, which has got asynchronous or stuff they do self-directed, as well as together in the virtual space. And when you work together in the longer space, we really suggest a minimum of 2 hours. And you'll be surprised how quickly 2 hours fly when you're working together with a group of people. And many people say, well, 4 hours is really, really long. Yes, it is, and you are tired at the end of it, but it is fantastic to practice skills, to get into deep conversation, or to do strategic work. So when you really want to start building behaviors, building awareness, and experimenting together, then I would definitely suggest a session of the length of 3 to 4 hours. You obviously do build in breaks as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I get to the design slide as well. And then at the beginning of that, whether it's the long modular journey or the face-to-face synchronous, but it's really important to contract how you're going to work together. And what we do then in the synchronous space is we have to work really hard with participants to get them out of their comfort zone of the traditional teleconference, which means we encourage them to get their voice into the room very quickly. As facilitators, we then design a process to hear from people very quickly, very early on, preferably using breakout rooms. So from a timing point of view, normally within 5 minutes of me speaking, I'd like to get everybody into breakout rooms, small groups, pairs, trios, whatever you need, just to get them talking, checking in with each other how they are, and then bringing them back to the main room. If you're working with smaller groups, normally 10 or 12, you could hear from everybody, but then please don't do like a creeping deaf. Try and find an exciting way just to get the voices into the room, but that eats a lot of your time as well, so be aware. Again, when you've got smaller groups and the bandwidth allows, definitely best practices to keep the videos on. Also talk to people about how they display their screens depending on which technology you use, so that you can see slides and people. And often we just talk without the slide deck, which means you've got this whole pizza in front of you with everybody's faces, which is really nice to see. Also, where possible, allow your participants to stay unmuted so that they can audibly engage. We call this the virtual nod, which is just saying something like, or yeah, or shaking your head or showing thumbs up. It's a really nice way to show the person who's speaking that they are being heard and that together you help each other make sense. And then, of course, using the chat functions, raising the hands, sharing comments, building on comments, etc. So try and make your synchronous work as experiential and as interactive as possible. If you don't know what breakout rooms are, Zoom, for instance, has a capacity to have a breakout room, as does Adobe Connect, WebEx. Sadly, Teams don't, but for Teams, what we do is we create various teams and then just ask people to join a specific team, and that is kind of a breakout room. So it's a really good idea, even if you've got a group of 50 people working together, maybe on a strategy workshop or systems thinking, that you send them into smaller groups where you can really get everybody's voice in the room. And just like in the face-to-face world, you know, your number will depend. 6 is quite a lot. It takes quite a lot of times. 4 works quite well. If you need to do work with practicing skills, pairs or trios work really well. So thinking about how you use that. All right, so that was a bit of how we contract. So now what we're going to do is look at the terminology. And when I looked at the Oxford Dictionary, learning for me is very much more around the experience, whereas training is very much more what we're doing now is teaching. And some of you may use learning and training together. In the virtual field, training normally refers to something like an e-module. So something that's an asynchronous thing where people just go in and they do something online, an online training, or online training. Whereas learning is kind of where we build new skills and have experiences. And then also, if you look at the words online and virtual, some people use them interchangeably to mean the same thing. But you must also be aware that for other companies or for other individuals, online means asynchronous. It means you do it by yourself on your own, like a MOOC, or, you know, a multi-open source thingy. But for other people, virtual means what we're doing now, being together in the virtual space. So just be aware when you speak to each other, to other colleagues as well, that you all know what you mean by the different things. And then, of course, Blended is using a combination of this. So when you've got employees that you want to develop a range of skills, you will probably be using a range of these things. So how do we learn? Well, there's a perceived wisdom that we learn new behaviors through our education and or with incentives, so getting rewarded by doing it, and recently with nudges to help us shift subconscious behavior. So the Fitbits that people are wearing, that's a kind of nudge theory, you know, to remind you that you've got to do your steps and change your behavior. However, all of these things in learning very heavily relies on willpower, which is very much a limited resource, and particularly during times of crisis or when our personal resilience is low, then you know, our learning is possibly going to suffer. And also educational learning, so learning things through education or incentives, does not necessarily change our psychological core, doesn't necessarily change our mind or our attitudes. So consider this, if our bodies change our minds, and our minds, it's closing in here, and our minds is the one that changes our behavior, and then our behavior changes our outcome. So think about it, our bodies change our minds, then our minds change our behavior, and then our behavior changes the outcome, changes the business. Then it stands to reason that when we design learning interventions or opportunities for people to learn, what we need to look at is that we need to look at creating an opportunity for them to practice something new, practice something different, or experiment with new behaviors that will change the core of the person. And that's at Ashridge, we are really keen on having experiential learning opportunities that embodies the change. So thinking about this, when you approach your learning, so many of you, I'm just pausing, many of you are in the face-to-face world. You are looking at the face-to-face world and you're saying, right, how do we have to choose from content to process? So you have to balance what content are you going to put in, how you're going to deliver your face-to-face training. This is no different in the virtual space. The thing that's probably different in the virtual space is you're going to use and I'm talking synchronous virtual space, what we're doing now, you're going to use far less content and much more emphasis on process. However, when you're thinking of asynchronous learning or training more specifically, then you want to probably upload that with more content. So you want to have more of the content sitting there and a different process for them as a learner to engage with that. If you're thinking about planning and emerging, so in the classroom, when you're doing face-to-face, which many of you will be very, very familiar with, you will have a plan. You've got your content, you've got your slides, you kind of know what you're going to do in the morning and afternoon, and you stick to the plan, and you deal with what happens in the room, with what happens with the participants, what they bring to the room. Now, this is no different in the virtual space. If anything, your plan is more concrete because you do really need to think about how long will it take people to get in and out of a breakout room and set up a Menti. So there's more emphasis on the plan, and you also have to stay much more attuned to what's happening to the audience. So are they engaged? Do they seem to be distracted? Are there too many quieter voices? How do I get the voice into the room if people are too quiet, or if there's one person that talks too much and dominates? So you really have to be able to balance all of these. And then thinking about your learner's needs, your employee needs, what it is you want to design. For some of you, it's perfect to play in this bottom left-hand quadrant where the single loop learning happens, because that's all you need. You need to upskill, you need to train them and stuff. So fire and healthy, fire and safety, or, you know, ethical resourcing or stuff like that. Perfect for it to sit there. And that can often be covered in like an e-learning module, which is designed very differently. However, when you're looking to have a mind shift change or a cultural change or a behavioral change, you probably will want to be designing something that sits and plays much more up in that top right-hand quadrant. So question for you is, what's the purpose of your learning? What do you want your employees to experience, to change? What do you need to shift? What do you need to nudge? And then how do you design and play with these 4 parameters? So in doing all of that, there are some basic expectations that you need to meet. So these basic expectations is basically what we've learned from surveying thousands of employees, students, apprenticeships, executives coming on our programs, working with and saying, what do you want from the virtual space, or for it to work for you, both blended, so both asynchronous and synchronous. And top of the list is it needs to be easy to use and easy to access. So whether it's a Zoom or WebEx, or whether it's a learning platform, LMS, whatever it is, make sure it's easy to access and easy to use. The second, not surprisingly, quality is it has to be relevant. The content, the process, everything has to be relevant to them and to their jobs. Otherwise, you know, you're dead in the water. They also want design to be innovative, and they want the content to be innovative. So yes, we do sometimes revisit theories that's quite old, but we need to make it relevant, and we need to maybe present it in a much more innovative design principled way. They are also looking for credibility and expertise in the delivery, and this is no different to the face-to-face world, but it's probably more enunciated or amplified in the virtual space. It's so much easier for things to go wrong in the virtual space. So developing that credibility and expertise delivering with technology is probably what they're looking for as well, or is what they're looking for. And then of course they want great quality. And this is not just great quality of a delivery, but it's great quality of content. It's great quality of customer interface, of customer experience. And there's a lot of competition out there, and you know, YouTube, Netflix, all of this stuff. So what we see as great quality is constantly changing. Learners, employees also want a wide range of learning opportunities. So this goes from on-the-job training to strategic projects that they work on, presenting to the board, right through to exams, reading, watching videos, to accommodate different learning styles as well. So make sure you have a range of learning opportunities built into your virtual offering, as well as your face-to-face, obviously. But not surprising for me that it's so low, but I think with our executive clients, this is much higher. So with executive education clients and with your employees, the opportunity to learn with each other, to collaborate, to talk about things, to make sense together, or to work from each other, to share best practice. As you've seen in the face-to-face world, this is probably the thing they enjoy the most. So make sure when you do build that into your program that there's an opportunity or a platform and time for them to have those dialogues, those discussions. And then effective technical support, making sure that if it's asynchronous and it's an LMS platform, that if they've got questions or they can't remember a password or something is not working, that there's someone to help them. Particularly relevant when you've got a global audience. So make sure you've got thinking about your helpline. You know, is it a centralized system? Is there a team of technical people who can assist your global learners so that they don't always have to wait for your central corporate office work hours? And also when you're working together synchronously like this. So we have 2 technical facilitators on today's call. We've got 570 participants now. So if there's any log-on issues and stuff, I certainly can't be dealing with that. So, you know, it's good to have that effective technical support as well. And then the responsiveness is if you ask them to discuss something asynchronously, so you're asking them to think about something and share with each other or prepare work. If they've got questions, send an email to where you directed them to reach you. How long do you take before you get back in touch with them? Because if they're an employee on a journey with you, if they're on a modular journey with you and they are reaching out for input or questions, it's really good to have somebody on the other side who monitors all of these things. All right, and then also helpful and a clear pathway. This is very, very relevant for each session, but it's more relevant for people who's on a journey, especially if there's a lot of modules that they need to engage with and stuff. So really making sure that there's a clear structure and a clear spine, that everything's signposted really, really well. So I'm sure none of this comes as a surprise to anybody who's worked in L&D and HR, because this is not that different from face-to-face, but it's really good to know that some of these things are maybe new and maybe novel to you if you're going into the virtual world. So this is the time where we're going to be sharing with each other just a little bit around what are your biggest challenges that you have, or sorry, your biggest fears or concerns that you have about moving towards virtual learning. So I see very kindly Lauren has put it for us into the chat room. So you can either click on the link in the chat and that will take you straight to the page. And all you need to do then is enter the code 852923, and there's an option to type as many words as you want just to describe your fear. Try and do one word if you can, because it will then create a word cloud. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds and then I'm going to share the screen, although actually it is in there at the moment. So Kirsty, I see you've put it in the chat. Make sure you put it on Menti for us. So I'm going to just share this with you now, and then we can see what you guys are saying. All right, so there you are. You're all very busy already. So technical issues, engagement, disengagement, attention, boring, things being boring, interaction, attention, interaction, boring, engagement. So retention, good. Retention is very important when you've got long thing, participation. Fantastic. So I am going to just have a look at those and see. This doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't really matter who the audience is that I do this. Those keywords that you have in there, bandwidth is the other one, so it's like a technical thing, resistance to it. I like that one. So I'm going to just swap back to this one and then share with you some of the things I thought you would say, of which many of them are on there. But before I do that, I want to just think about the word that you put there, or the fears that you've put down there, the concerns that you have. Many of them are rooted in your own assumptions or your own bias around working virtually. Of course, that comes from your own experience virtually. And it's really important at this point to really, the majority of us have not had good experiences with learning and working virtually, and therefore what you see is what you get. So if you're going to go into the virtual space not having had a good experience, my real encouragement to you is to partner with somebody in your organization or outside of your organization who holds a different view, who's really excited about working virtually, who sees the potential, who's maybe got the confidence or the experience, and just partner with them for a while until you've been able to debunk some of your own assumptions and to start seeing fuller picture. So the challenges you've mentioned, this is fantastic. We'll share the screenshot of that as well in later so that you can have a look at that afterwards. But first of all, I want to say it is possible to create high levels of trust and connection in the virtual space. So there's a misnomer that you can't really connect, or that you need to see each other face to face to work effectively together. Not at all. The second thing is, it is possible to have highly interactive and experiential virtual learning sessions. It just takes some thinking and some creativity. So I see Paul has lost audio connection. Hopefully nobody else has. Lauren, if my audio is bad, do let me know. Also, it is possible to have virtual learning. To have fun in the virtual learning environment, and to have a real mixture of self-directed, collective, synchronous, asynchronous, so you can mix things up a little bit. And then definitely, with virtual learning, you can engage employees' attention for more than 7 to 15 minutes. Many people say, oh, I've read this research and people only concentrate for 2 to 3 minutes. Yeah, that's true when they're surfing the net. But when you design a process that's engaging, interactive, and gets them talking about real things relevant to them, you can keep them busy for 4 hours easily. They're going to be tired, but you can keep them busy. And then the other thing, delivering virtually or going on a virtual program is not necessarily the second best option. So many employees feel very hard done by when they get offered a place on a virtual program, because they really want to go to the hotel and they want to have the whole experience. So you have to work at changing that mindset to really upsell the benefits of virtual, and it doesn't have to be second best in terms of the learning. Granted, you might not have the nice hotels, and then, Ashridge is a fantastic place to come to, but the quality of the learning does not necessarily have to be second best. All right, and then the next one is delivering virtually is not necessarily cheaper. So many clients have this unrealistic expectation that to design and to deliver a virtual training leadership program, for instance, is going to be a cheaper option. It isn't necessarily, because the design might be more intensive. It might take much longer. You've still got to do the technical landscape audit and all of that stuff. But what it certainly is a more cost-effective option for yourself and also for participants in terms of time away from the office, the travel expenses, the accommodation, all of the rest. But in itself, to design it and to deliver it is not necessarily any different to designing and delivering a good face-to-face program. Oops. Don't know what I did there. Your technology platform do play a role, but they shouldn't dictate what you do. But they certainly will have some constraints, and sometimes you'll have to do a lot of work beforehand, first of all, to get that. And then employees do accept and they do appreciate virtual learning if it's done well. So hopefully that will help you. And then the last one I've left as a question. So anyone can deliver virtual training. Yes and no. So yes, but it takes different skills. You need to practice. So if you're fantastic in the face-to-face world, it doesn't really mean you translate well into the virtual space. You may need to work with your presence. You may need to work with your skill to do the virtual one, but it is possible to develop that. So I'm a great believer that it is possible to develop and that anyone can deliver with development. So what is my key top tip for you? In terms of balancing, it's really important to balance the task when you work with the virtual is understand what it is you want to achieve. What's the learning outcomes you want to get? What's the best process to design in order to get to that, both synchronous and asynchronous? And how do you connect with your participants, with your employees? How do you keep that connection from joining, so as they're joining through the whole pre-work experience, post-work, the whole thing. And these are the three things that's really key. And at Ashridge, what we do is the reason we are able to create highly impactful virtual learning is because we are able to balance looking at the tasks, so looking at what the learning needs, aligning the learning objectives, the planning of the content and all of that, as well as looking at the relationship. These two tight enables us to also create a process that creates dialogue, thinking together, co-create and innovate. So all of those things. All right. So in terms of thinking of the hurdles that you want to do, I am going to turn off. I see somebody has said that there's a issue with audio, so I've turned my camera off, so hopefully that will help a little bit with audio. Thank you for that. So in terms of thinking about how do you implement it, it might be that you're sitting in an organization where you just don't understand how you can shift from face-to-face to the virtual world. And in that case, you have what we call a cognitive hurdle. Some of you, on the other hand, might find, you know what, we know what we need to do, but we don't have the right resources. We don't have the right people to do the design or to do the delivery, or we don't have the right technology to do this. So you might have a resource hurdle. Some of you might have a political hurdle, which means you have opposition from parts of the business, maybe from procurement, or I don't know, HR, whoever, saying, no, this is not the way to go, and no, that's not the technology to use, and that's something you need to overcome. Or others of you might have none of those, but you have a motivational hurdle. So you have people who's not minded to change, whether it is your HR and L&D people, or whether it's your business leaders or line managers or the actual participants themselves. It could be a blend of all of that. So how do you foster and sustain a cultural learning environment if you have some of these hurdles? So I would recommend a three-step process, and I'm noticing that we're coming to the end of my time. So I'm going to show you the process and know that you're going to have this as a resource to go through afterwards. But basically, as step one, I would say focus on the cognitive and the political hurdles. And then once you've understood through those, move on to the resource hurdle, and then move on to the motivational hurdle. And to help you with that, I've kind of come up with what are the best practice tips in order of doing this. So I'm just going to populate the screen. I'm not going to have a time to read through all of these, but you will get the slide. But the things in highlighted is what I would focus on. So as you start, really understand what technologies do you have, especially if you're a global organization? Don't just assume you can use Zoom or you can use Webinar or WebEx or whatever. Make sure you understand the technical remit within your global thing. When you design a program, make sure you have a spine. So make sure you have a really clear whether you're linking it to something like emotional intelligence or whether whatever you're linking it to, that you've got a spine that you can hang things off, that you can hang the asynchronous and the synchronous things off. And when you work in this space together, make sure that there's a rhythm or a pace that's suited to the learning outcomes. If you're working in a virtual session, like a 4-hour session, then this connect focus. So always connect with your participants, give them a focus, maybe one model, give them an opportunity to collaborate, make sure they can apply to their context, give them time to reflect, and then get them to commit to an action. So those things are really, really critical. And then, of course, thinking about how do you onboard them, how do you launch the program is really, really critical. And I'll share with you just one slide of how we do it in our apprenticeship degree program. So a really phenomenal onboarding process that takes sometimes months to get participants ready to engage in that, because as you rightly said in your fears, one of the biggest problems with the virtual long-term journey, so modular program, is people's commitment to drop off, and especially if it's only 2-hour blocks. You know, it's really easy to cancel a 2-hour block for something else. So the way you keep the engagement and the way you keep the attendance rates up is to make sure you've contracted with them and you have a really strong process of keeping them engaged and client management. In terms of the people, looking at your resources, it's really important that you have the right facilitators and administrators and designers in your organization to design and deliver these. But also make sure that not only for them, but particularly for them and for your participants, they need to know what's in it for them. It's very hard for face-to-face facilitators to completely swap to doing virtual delivery, because for many of them, they get their energy from being in the classroom. So you really need to understand what this shift for them will mean. And then when it comes to budget, only thing I can say there is design should drive cost. When you are constrained by a specific budget and you're trying to design it around the budget, chances are you both really needed to deliver the learning outcomes. So we'll start with what are the learning outcomes we want to get, and then let that drive your design, and then that should determine your costs. It is really important to understand the real costs associated with that. Includes the admin time, it includes the facilitation time, it includes the time in the back office to make sure you've got the right cohorts joining at the right time for some of your more complicated global programs. And then with timelines is don't underestimate the amount of time that it takes to design and to pilot. I can't stress it enough, with a small group of people to really test out particularly your synchronous elements. And again, with the pilot, blend people who like both who are pro virtual and who are anti-virtual, because you want a good experience. So make sure you pilot it with them. And then it takes time to sustain or to generate engagement, to get people to sign up for these, but it takes a lot of time to get people to stay on board with the virtual program. And if you don't contract with them up front, if you don't make them feel like they're a cohort, if you don't make them feel that they're invested in this program, it's going to be really easy for them to drop off the program. And then you're really going to struggle. And then finally, in terms of how do you communicate, I think the most important thing here is the fourth point, is when you communicate coming on this program, it's a virtual program, make sure you move from telling them about it to contracting with them. And that might mean having focus groups with them beforehand, meeting with their line managers, discussing this program, selling the fact that this is a commitment that they're doing and that it will change their mindset and change their behaviors. Whoops, I'm doing it again. Where am I? Wrong one, sorry guys. And then for this one, ensure that there's relevance for motivation, demonstrate personalized tailoring, and so from motivation, as long as it's relevant and as long as it demonstrates value add, is probably much better for them. And then finally, in terms of empowerment, is have a process that involves your line managers and preferably also senior leaders in the learning journey. This becomes probably more relevant in the virtual world, because we know that people often will think, oh, well, this is not so important. But if they can see that their line managers know about it, or that the senior leaders are engaged in it, it's much more likely to make them want to take part. And often in our designs, we work at facilitating an opportunity for dialogue between the hierarchies. So making sure you even think about how do you bring that in, or giving them an opportunity to deliver a virtual presentation to the board or to their senior leaders. Really great motivation for participants. All right, and then as an end, as I promised, I would show you a slide, for instance, on board participants. So if you're having people thinking about doing an apprenticeship, it's a very long process. It can take up to 6 months to really get participants from when you speak to the organization, or when you as HR and L&D speak to the business and saying, okay, we're thinking of this leadership program, going through the whole process until the actual participants are in the virtual classroom. That takes a long time, and it takes a lot of dedication, and this is often the bit that we forget about with L&D and HR when we design programs. We kind of spend all the time designing it, and we don't think about the onboarding and that whole internal communication and the fantastic launch. So in the end, as a final thing, is when you design your programs, whether it's blended or face-to-face, make sure that you have a good mix. Make sure it's rigorous and pragmatic. Make sure that it's both flexible and adaptable, that it's relational and relevant, and that it's both situational and contextual. And I mean, this is a great slide, and I could talk 2 hours just around this one, but what it means is that these are key design elements that is relevant for the face-to-face world, but it's equally relevant for the virtual world. And you just have to get this technology. So,
hi Ilse, it's Lauren here.
Hey Lauren.
Hi, and your mic just dropped out slightly on the last point there, so I think it'd be really useful for everybody on the call if you could just repeat the last point.
The last point was, thank you, Lauren. So the last point was that this is like a palette that you can play with. And this is really stuff that you would do for a design of a face-to-face intervention as well. And it becomes more relevant when you're thinking about using technology for an online intervention, just to think, how do I create relevance and relationality using technology? How do I make it flexible and adaptable using technology? So that's basically it. It's just saying, have fun and think about these 4 palettes that you need to play with. So Lauren, seeing that you're on there, I've come to the end. I've done relatively well, gone 5 minutes over my time. I do have 5 minutes. What have you got for us in terms of questions? Do I click on the Q&A and have a look there?
Yeah, so if you just want to go through the Q&A, there's lots of great questions that we've received. Feel free to pick them and answer them as you would like.
All right, so what I will do, I might not get a chance to go through all of these online. I'll answer them as long as people are on the call, but I also will answer them typed an answer. And Lauren, I believe they'll receive my typed answers as well then, won't they?
Yes, we can make sure that they're shared with the people who've been asking the questions.
Fantastic. So if you do need to drop off early and I haven't answered yours, then just look for that. So a question for later. Bigger anxiety is with returning from virtual back to face-to-face. I can see how the world's learning really well now to engage virtually and the environment benefit that comes with it. But our business model depends a lot on face-to-face. Afraid this is a question I discussed with the client this morning. I agree, and I think this COVID-19 crisis has helped the plight of technology and learning virtually tremendously. So many companies are realizing that they're not set up correctly to work virtually. And also they're realizing that they can work virtually and that people can actually be productive and enjoy. So I do think we're going to see a lot of changes as a result of today, and certainly happy to help you think about how do you get more prepared for that. Another question from Meg is, what's the ideal size of a group to make this way of working experiential? Meg, it depends. We work with groups up to maybe 35, but then we have at least 2 faculty on the call with a technical facilitator and go into breakout rooms and work for 2 to 4 hours. If you are by yourself and you don't have a technical facilitator, I would say a group of 12 is probably a good optional thing. Hope that answers it. Anonymous question: how do we encourage the less motivated students who tend to switch their cameras off and check out during the virtual class? Oh, great question. So this is the kind of thing you need to ask yourself. You need to have little quizzes built in, or you insist that they have the camera on. Say, this for this session you have to have cameras on, or put them into breakout rooms. I often do a pop-up where I see the names and I pose a question, and I do this a lot more with undergraduate or postgraduate students, and I say, right, Ron, what do you think about this? And then you throw the questions out, so you constantly keep them in there. I see there was a question to share the Menti results. We are going to share those with you, but what I will do while I look at the question, I'll share that in the background so you can look at that while I look at the questions. All right, so another question we have from Sarah: is Zoom my favorite platform? Absolutely, by far, because it's much cheaper than WebEx and Adobe Connect. The problem for me with Zoom is that it doesn't allow you to post a question in the breakout room. About the design with that, and their whiteboard is a little bit clunky, but then most of them is. Having said that, some of the clients I work with really enjoy BlueJeans as well, and they say that works really well. Teams is great, but it doesn't have the breakout rooms, but we've kind of got a way to work around it. But I like Zoom. I work with it a lot. How do you manage sound quality when working against traditional teleconference etiquette? Yes, so the sound quality is, we normally get them to stay on mute, but to constantly unmute themselves to talk. So just to become slick at unmuting and talking and nodding, and to use thumbs up when you know, if you can't do the audible nod. But if we're small groups, if we work in groups of 10 or less, everybody's normally unmuted. And then if they suddenly have a dog barking, we get them to close. Also, make sure you work in your organizations in a quiet space. So we contract with clients to say, when your participants join, they have to have a quiet space. Open plan office is terrible for joining virtual learning. So you normally have to have a quiet pod or a technical room where you can go and just work. And that's what we mean by doing a technical audit. If your whole world is shared office space, it's going to be really difficult for your employees to engage in a 4-hour virtual learning. So you might have to just make sure that they can work from home. I'm noticing that I've reached the end of the time, but I'm happy to carry on going through these questions. So a couple of people have joined, are leaving as well. So for those of you who do have to go, thank you very much for attending. I will continue to answer questions until everybody has gone, but I will also type in my answers for the rest of you. So thank you for joining, and I'm so sorry you couldn't speak to me. All right, so another question from Sharon. Is this in accordance with the ways in which neuroscience is developing? Yes, absolutely. So a lot of what we do in terms of experiential learning is talking about neural pathways, developing muscle memory, you know, practicing new skills. So we base a lot of our experiential learning design based on the new stuff on neuroscience, and also giving them an opportunity to be challenged, you know, to be emotionally aroused, not over challenge, but if you have an emotional reaction in the classroom, the learning tends to stick, and that's just part of neuroscience. Can you elaborate on the double loop learning process and provide an example? So Alison, double loop learning is when you design a program that tests people's assumptions that they hold about something. So if they have an unconscious assumption around a bias or a gender or something, you give them an experience that checks their own assumption about something in themselves or something in others. And then through discussing it and reflecting on the fact that the data that they're getting back in the experience doesn't quite match what they thought they were going to get, and if you get them to reflect on it, they can often readdress that assumption. They can check their own bias or their own assumption because they become conscious of it, and they can consciously choose to change it. So that's why we do quite a lot of experiential programs like this. And then I have a question from Anna, just sliding down. Lauren, feel free to stop me anytime, but I'll carry on. How should we manage people working in subgroups? Do we need to have one facilitator per subgroup? How do we bring them back into the common session on time? So the lovely thing with Zoom is you can automatically bring them back. When you close a breakout room, it sets to give them 60 seconds, and then it pulls them, literally brings them back into the big space. So it's so much easier than the virtual world. You don't have to chase them. And sometimes we do have facilitators going into the breakout room, especially if they're doing things like thinking about strategies or practicing strategic skills or some difficult conversations. They might have an actor with them. But many times we also just give them an exercise and give them the time to go and speak. So we do like a virtual walk and talk where they go in pairs and they have a conversation. So sometimes it's facilitated and sometimes it's not. It's really important to say that we never ever record the breakout room. So that's a private space. It's a space where they can talk without being recorded, and we always contract about recording the session in plenary. So you don't have to record. You can also turn the recording off. When you say interactive, what other methods and then discussions, breakout rooms, polls, and virtual flip charts? So we, Stefan, we often have simulations, so business systems, you know, where you run your own company. You can play that collectively at the same time, or you can play it over time. We have our leadership experience, which is our flagship program, which involves events happening. They're running a company. It's a real immersion simulation. They get interviewed by journalists. People barge into their virtual office and chat, you know, that kind of stuff. So that kind of simulations. Two very straightforward ones where, you know, they have to collaborate to solve a puzzle in the virtual space. So we do use quite a lot of experiential stuff that we use. And then, of course, virtual reality is something that we are looking into. And as virtual reality is becoming cheaper going forward, I'm really excited about that space, because it does mean we can begin to use that as well going forward. But at the moment, it's still a little bit expensive. So what is the best way to challenge negative assumptions from other people when booking virtual training courses? The best way is for them to experience something great, which is why it's really important, if you're going to launch this internally, that you make sure you do it really, really well, or you work with a partner to help you design and deliver the pilot so that that's excellent. So once they've experienced it once, that can probably convert them to being, and then to enable, to give a voice to your champions, so other people who have experienced it, give them a platform, make sure they convince the others, because sometimes they like to hear it from colleagues and not from HR. Would you have a good...
Ilse, we have a list of all of the questions that have come in, and as you said earlier, we'll make sure that you get all the questions so that they are all answered today. And as you mentioned earlier in the webinar, we'll be sharing the recording along with the word cloud answers that came in. So yeah, if you just want to maybe answer one more question, and then we can allow people to get back to their fun day.
Perfect. Well, I've just answered Lisa's in the chat, which can blended learning include face-to-face too? Absolutely. That's a good way of doing it. So absolutely. So it was a pleasure to have so many of you on the call. Thank you for the rest of you who still stayed to the end. I will make sure I go through all these questions. This has been informative. So thank you for your time.